Hello dear listener, please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. As I drove further into the desert, the road deteriorated. The lifeless landscape on both sides of the highway was profoundly disheartening. According to my calculations, I should reach my destination by evening. The Jamara Valley lay between the mountains which had already appeared on the horizon. In the distance, my eyes caught a white dot. I stopped the car and pulled out my binoculars. Through the shimmering heat rising from the asphalt, it was hard to make out the vehicle. There didn't seem to be anyone around. I decided to get closer. I couldn't go around it anyway. Sand was all around, and my car could easily get stuck. The closer I got, the louder the alarm bells rang in my head. Something was not right here. Just to be on the safe side, I moved the rifle closer, removing the safety. A white Toyota was parked, its nose buried in a pile of sand that had blown onto the road. Inside the cabin, a man sat motionless, his head dropped onto the steering wheel. His left arm hung limply by his side, and I couldn't see what was on the right. Slightly to the left, almost in the middle of the road, lay a woman dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. She too showed no signs of life. It seemed as though she had been trying to escape from someone. The question was, why had she jumped out of the car? Perhaps she was trying to get away from the driver? I didn't rush to turn off the engine and exit the car. My brain was working intensely, analyzing the situation. How long had they been here? No one had overtaken me, so they must have been here before me. At least for a day. On such a hot day, rigor mortis would set in more slowly, but still, it was evident that the bodies were not fresh. They looked as if they had just come out of the shower. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the driver's hand, which had been hanging motionless by his side, barely twitch. Doubt shattered like grenade fragments. It was an ambush. I shifted into first gear, simultaneously lowering the right window. The car lurched forward, maneuvering around the woman, lying on the ground. There was one thought piercing through my mind, not to get stuck in the sand. With my right hand, I raised the rifle and fired a short burst directly at the Toyota's driver. I could see the bullets piercing his body. He twitched a few times, like a rag doll on a string, and tumbled out of the cabin. It seemed he was now truly dead. A pistol fell from his right hand onto the sand, but I couldn't make out the model. On the left side of the road, an automatic burst rang out. I could hear the bullets striking the side of my car. I pressed the gas pedal, and then it happened, my worst fear. The car came to a stop, stuck. Stuck in the sandy drift, I opened the left door and rolled onto the sand, shooting as I went. In response, a hail of bullets struck the ground near me. My left forearm was grazed, and I felt the blood trickling, but my arm still worked. This meant the bullets had just grazed me. I pinpointed the direction of the gunfire, struggling to keep the rifle steady despite the pain in my arm. I fired a short burst in the direction of the attacker. I didn't know how many bullets I had left. There was no way to reach the spare magazine. All that was left was the woman. In the silence, all I could hear was the crunch of sand under heavy boots. I leaned against the car, bringing the rifle to bear, and waited. It was like a game now. Who would make the next move? Finally, I saw a shadow emerge from behind the car. The sun was shining on their back. The sand rustled, and a head with a baseball cap appeared. My rifle jerked, expelling the last cartridge, and the woman's lifeless body fell at my feet, the same one that had been lying on the road for several minutes. I sat motionless, waiting for another attack, but all was quiet. I slowly crawled into the seat and turned the ignition key. The engine started instantly. Everything was normal. I carefully backed up, then took a slight right and drove through the sand to stop the car. I dressed the wound first. It hurt, but I had to bear it. The wound wasn't dangerous, but I gave myself a shot of anesthetic just in case. I didn't touch the bodies. In a couple of days they would be gone. There were a lot of dead people around here. I checked the Toyota, but I didn't find anything. There were 3 characters, and they were all lying in the sand, showing no signs of life. I picked up the gun that had fallen out of the driver's hand. It was a Beretta 96, a good gun. I shoved the trophy with a full magazine behind my pants belt and walked to my car. Soon, a bleak desert landscape stretched on both sides of the Scoa Road. After about 60 kilometers, some buildings appeared ahead. As I got closer, I realized that it was an old, miraculously preserved caravanserai. I drove leisurely under the arch and found myself in the courtyard, where a small water fountain once stood in the center. I got out of the car and walked under the shadow of one of the arches. There were no people in sight. If there were, they were hiding from the burning sun inside. But the yard was well maintained, and where the wall was cracked or chipped, someone had reapplied fresh clay, which had dried quickly under the fierce light. I looked around the buildings, but there were no people. Maybe no one lives here all the time. Maybe they come here sometimes. The question is why? As an inn, these buildings have outlived their usefulness. Maybe it's a staging area. In one of the rooms, I found some antique jugs. Mostly brass, but there were a couple of silver ones. I threw them in the car. I had to drive to get to the valley by daylight. Finally, the road came to the mountains. It meandered between the rocks until it came to a babbling mountain stream. It got cooler. Instead of dunes, there were trees along the road. I realized I had reached my goal. An hour later, I entered a small village. But there was electricity and, most importantly, a bazaar. That's where I was going tomorrow morning. I stayed in a small hotel, proudly called Hotel. The room had a shower and a toilet. What more could a traveler want? I ate some dry rations and went to bed. I was exhausted. The trip turned out to be more than successful. In addition to the order itself, I bought something for myself. A day later, I filled up the car and 2 more cans of gasoline and set off on the return trip. I had to spend the night on the way again, but it was peaceful. By the end of the second day, I was already entering Ludbeck's yard. He did not meet me empty-handed either. I gave him everything I had brought. Delivery of the cargo did not concern me. Specially trained people were in charge of it. When I told Ludbeck about my adventures, he clucked his tongue for a long time, expressing either approval or condemnation of my frivolity. Then we drank charcha and I went to bed. After spending the night in Amina's arms, I went to the airport in the morning, accompanied by a friend. I did not say goodbye to Amina. As they say, long farewells bring tears. I had with me a few coins and a couple of funny souvenirs I found in an abandoned caravanserai. We hugged in silence. I saw in Ludbeck's eyes a mute question, and I knew what it was. I like her very much, but I am a vagabond, a wanderer by life, so it's better not to have a family yet. I shook the hand extended to me. I thought a little and took off my talisman from my neck given by my grandfather and gave it to Ludbeck. Give it to Amina as a memento. My hometown greeted me with cold wind and nasty spring rain, a stark contrast to the places I had flown from. No one greeted me because I had not told anyone I was coming. I picked up my car in the underground parking lot and took a leisurely drive home. In the 2 weeks I had been gone, the snow had almost melted, leaving piles of black mud along the sides of the highway. It had frozen overnight, and now the car was almost sliding on the ice, churning up water. Blowing the blue smoke through the half-open window, I felt dreary. Too many women had been around me lately. But for some reason, the memories of the last one splashed in my soul. Amina, yes, she was the one who had captured my heart. But alas, I'll never meet her again. Most likely, Ulugh will marry her off to some respectable gentleman. I can only wish her happiness. An hour later, I jumped out on the ring road, and after a while, I was pulling up to my house. When I tried to open the front gate, the key didn't work. That's strange. I had recently changed the lock and everything was perfect. I got out of the car and pressed the intercom button. I was tired from the road and now I wanted to drink whiskey and sleep. What do you want? An unfamiliar male voice answered me through the intercom. I was even a little taken aback. I need to get into the house, I said in a stupid way. In a minute, the gate opened and a middle-aged man stood in the doorway. What do you want? The owners are still asleep. Get out of here, he said, trying to slam the gate in my face. But my brain went into automatic mode and I came to my senses when the guard flew aside, hitting his head on the brick fence. Yeah, you can't beat skill, I thought to myself as I carefully stepped over the man's leg, stretched across the path, and headed for the front door. The glass door was unlocked and I made my way into the hallway, carefully setting my bag down beside the couch. I wondered who the new owners were. I hadn't rented or sold the house. Maybe Ala and her monkey had shown up again. I wasn't angry, just surprised. I went into the kitchen and noticed that the fridge was mine, but the tea set was someone else's. It's too bright. I don't like those, I muttered to myself as I opened the cupboard. The dishes were all mixed up, mine and someone else's, but only china. The antique brass that looked so beautiful behind the glass was gone. I made coffee and went back to the lobby, where I had to wait for the owners to wake up. I must have dozed off because I didn't hear them come in. "Hey man, who the hell are you?" A loud voice woke me up. A man in a green satin robe was hovering over me, rolling his eyes in surprise. An unfamiliar young woman stood next to him, her long fingers with blood-red nails frantically typing something on her iPhone. "I'm actually in my house," I said loudly. "Who the hell are you?" "Liz Hill," the man replied, clearly agitated. "We bought this house and moved in 3 days ago. The owner and her child went to her husband up north and sold the house to us." The man was seething with righteous anger. "The owner is a young woman named Galia, and the girl's name is Vera, about 4 years old." I was beginning to realize what had happened. Arida Galia even let a tear at the airport. "Come back soon." She also tried to slip me a baby. She did it fast. Everything was so banal that it made me laugh. It's true what they say. You shouldn't let strangers into your house. I can imagine her laughing at me when she left with the money. I went into the study without arguing, pushed aside the painting hanging on the wall, and opened the door of the secret safe. I took out the deed to the house and said, "Here you go. The house has one owner, and I'm not married. I'll give you 1 hour to get out of here. I'm getting tired of this." I put the dishes back where they belong. "We bought this house, and we're not going anywhere. You get out. If you have a problem with it, sue me." The guy was almost yelling. "Nina, did you call the police?" "Well, God knows I did everything I could." I stood up and grabbed the man's nose with my right hand. Without giving him a second thought, I threw him out the unlocked door and into the street. While he was splashing in the rain, trying to get up, I walked over to his wife and said, "Get out." I didn't bother. The woman nimbly jumped outside and tried to help her husband up. I didn't feel sorry for them. From the looks of it, they're not poor. They'll get by somehow. While we were stomping around, a police car pulled up in front of the house. But it was me they were tying up. The pimply sergeant even hit me a couple of times with his fist in the stomach, consolidating the success. The policeman cheerfully dragged me to the car, shouting something joyfully into the radio station. At the police station, I showed the house documents to an important official in civilian clothes. He read the papers for a long time, moving his lips in a funny way. Then he sighed and said, "This is a matter for the court to decide. You had no right to kick the current owners out of the house and to abuse them." I did not comment on his words and asked him to make the phone call I was supposed to make. I quickly dialed the number. At the other end of the line, I was listened to carefully and disconnected. About half an hour later, the door to the office opened with a bang against the wall. The boss sitting opposite me even jumped from surprise. The body of a man in a cream suit floated into the office. He took a look around the room and said in a casual manner, "Arkady Roisman, I am Mr. Koltsov's lawyer." The man wagged his chin in my direction. "On what grounds was my client detained?" He tried to forcibly expel. The chief began to speak, but the lawyer didn't let him finish. "The legal owner of the house is my client, as confirmed by documents." The lawyer's voice filled the office, stating that Mr. Koltsov does not need to prove what is already obvious. My client must be released immediately. However, he is accused of beating up the victim. The chief tried to interject, but the victim in this case is Mr. Koltsov. The individuals who attempted to take over his house must leave immediately. They should pray to God that Mr. Koltsov does not sue them for stealing his property. The lawyer waved some papers like a flag, demanding that a squad be sent to clear the house of invaders. I thought to myself, this lawyer should be speaking at the UN. As I was leaving the station, accompanied by the lawyer and the police captain, I saw a familiar, pimply sergeant standing by the car. "Just a minute, gentlemen," I said. "I have some business to attend to." I walked up to the sergeant and knocked him out with a straight punch to the jaw. As he fell, his head hit the side of the police car and his cap rolled aside. When I turned around, rubbing my bruised arm, I noticed that the lawyer and the captain were looking the other way. The music came in waves, almost knocking me off my feet. I sat at the bar and poured myself a third glass. The bartender looked at me sympathetically, his eyes pleading for more. I nodded, and suddenly a painfully familiar face was reflected in the mirrored shelf. I sobered up and quickly turned around. Next to her, hugging her by the waist, stood a lanky foreign man. To be honest, I was a little confused. Natasha didn't see me, and I decided not to rush to her with a shout of "Hello, my love." Something told me that I should wait. I turned to the bartender, who nodded understandingly. He seemed to have seen through my ruse. I sipped my whiskey slowly, trying to keep an eye on the couple's movements. Natasha was dressed in an expensive outfit, wearing a gold necklace with diamonds around her neck. As an antique dealer, I knew what to look for, and it seemed that my ex-lover was in the clear. But then I wondered, why isn't her daughter Vera with her? Instead, she is with a con artist named Galia. It seemed strange that if everything was fine, Natasha wouldn't have taken her daughter with her. Or maybe the child isn't even hers. Perhaps she needed a con artist to divorce me and gain sympathy. It was all too crazy, and these thoughts were swirling around in my alcohol-soaked head. I couldn't even decide whether to approach Natasha or not. What if she's with Galia? The music suddenly stopped, leaving my ears ringing. I looked at the display case of bottles. With the bottles, Natasha wasn't reflected in it. So they were seated at a table. I cautiously turned around. Right there they were, in the alcove. A waitress stood at the table where Natasha and her boyfriend were sitting. The young woman leaned over and said something to her beau. He got up and walked toward the restrooms. I realized it was now or never. "Hello, my love," I spoke softly, but Natasha heard me perfectly well. "May I sit down?" Natasha stared at me for a while, then nodded nervously and looked around, searching for her companion with her eyes. "What's up? How are you?" I asked without raising my voice. She obviously didn't know what to talk to me about. "How is your daughter? Have you already taken her away from her friend?" I asked sweetly. "What daughter? I don't have any children. Go away, my husband will be back." Natasha looked around confused again. "Who is Vera?" I started to boil. My beloved met me unkindly. And this is the woman I've been dreaming about all these years? On the other hand, I must have invented the fairy tale of unearthly love. Natasha doesn't owe me anything. Suddenly I was disgusted. I was about to get up when someone grabbed me from behind by the collar. I could see Natasha's pupils dilating with fear. "Don't foul this," she shrieked. I was thrown from my chair and fell, hitting my head on the floor. While I was trying to figure out what was going on, I got a solid kick in the right side of my leg. I was drunk, but my reflexes worked and I managed to regroup. A serious man at Natasha's, but jealous and bad. The jealous man wanted to kick me again, but I managed to grab him by the bony stag and yank him toward me. The man collapsed to the floor, at the same time pulling down the tablecloth and dishes. Now there were two of us on the floor. Not so lonely anymore, but it was time to do the honors. I got up as quickly as I could and staggered toward the exit, passing the bar. In the glass window, I saw a jealous woodpecker rushing after me. Frankly, I was getting pretty tired of fighting with him. I let him get close, then took a step to the right and punched him in the eye. The jealous man collapsed on his back, obediently counting with his head the steps of the small staircase leading to the locker room. At that moment, the music blared, and his pitiful squeak was drowned out by the crazy decibels. Why do I have to get beaten up all the time? I felt so sorry for myself that I even brushed a tear off my cheek. I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself sympathetically in the mirror. There wasn't even anyone to feel sorry for me. On the cab ride home, I sobered up a bit, and that's not good. I went to the kitchen, took a bottle out of the cabinet, and fell down on my favorite couch with relief. Suddenly I realized I wasn't alone in the house. Raising my head, I saw in the summer darkness of the hall calmly sitting in an armchair, an old man with graying hair at his temples. How did he get in here? That was the first thing that came to my mind. This place is a back alley. It's not good to drink alone. Suddenly, the unexpected guest spoke. He took a telescopic plastic cup out of his coat pocket and with a sharp movement of his hand, brought it into action. "I can bring a glass one," I muttered uncertainly. "No need," the man grinned. "This one is better." I poured the whiskey and we drank in silence. "What's good about it?" The guest frowned. "Worse than our moonshine." We were silent for a while until the man got down to business. "You had a very productive trip to Central Asia?" The client was very pleased. He lit a thin cigarette without asking permission. "But you will have to go back to those places again." I looked at the guest questioningly. "There's a little business, a very well-paid one." The man let out a thin stream of smoke from his mouth. "Silver again?" I asked, slowly coming to my senses. "No, not silver. I know of your adventures in Red Sands." The guest looked for an ashtray. "The one where you encountered the elusive worm." "Your story impressed a very wealthy man to the point where he wanted the trophy." I almost choked, but I haven't seen it. "That's just a guess," the guest said. I was surprised beyond belief. "So figure out what it was. Mysticism or reality?" The guest stood up. "The fee will be," he said, such a sum that my eyes went black. "When do I have to go?" The lust for profit threw away all doubts. For that kind of money, I was ready to walk to Central Asia. "A man you know well will contact you. He will give you the necessary instructions, help you with equipment and necessary outfit." "When will he contact me?" "Take your time. All in good time." The guest began to button his coat. "Just a moment. I have a favor to ask of you." I got up too. "Yes?" The guest looked at me curiously. I told him about the recent events in my house and my assumptions about the people involved. The man listened to me and asked, "And what do you want? To take money from the crooks?" "No, it's not my money. You can keep it as a fee." I looked the guest straight in the eye. "I'm interested in the child. Who is he and where is he now? It's not God's way to give a girl hope and then return her to." "All right, I hear you." The guest didn't let me finish. "What to do with the crooks?" "At your discretion," I said. The man turned and disappeared behind the front door. "Recently I have a vintage radio in my office, made back in the 50s of the last century. I took the receiver from my mother when she persistently complained about the abundance of old junk. It's a beautiful tube radio in working order. It had been bought by my grandfather, so it had passed to me as a sort of inheritance. It now stood on a vintage cabinet to the left of the table and delighted the eye with its perfect shapes. Yes, people knew how to make good things in their time. Time flies fast. Herein, radio receivers of the 60s are becoming antiques. Yes, what is their receivers? Equipment 70-80s is now in the antique trend. I am very often contacted by fans of tape recorders of the late 80s of the last century. They also ask about video equipment from the early 90s, such as VCRs, analog camcorders, and tape recorders. 30 years ago, we used this equipment, believing that it could not be better, and now it has become vintage. DVD players are next. Apparently, every generation sooner or later begins to feel nostalgic for a bygone time, and may, without even realizing it, look for things that can bring them back to their past, at least for a while. To be honest, vintage radio equipment is not my area of expertise, but I've started to think more and more often about opening a special department in my store dedicated to this topic. I believe that this direction of antique business is very promising. I made myself comfortable in the armchair, took out an empty bottle of Jameson from the depths of the table, and poured 2 fingers of the amber drink into the glass. There was no question of what to do. If there was a radio, it was necessary to listen to it play. I looked out of the window. It was snowing, which was not quite typical for April. Large snowflakes were beating against the window like frozen butterflies trying to make their way to the burning fireplace. It was cold, and I stood up and closed the window. Finally, a melody of a sentimental French song from the 60s came out of the speaker. It was a wonderful time. Girls with natural breasts, stockings with elastic bands, short skirts that barely covered their panties. I even closed my eyes with nostalgic memories, clearly imagining that time known to me only from old magazines and movies. I decided to take a closer look at the things I had brought back from my last trip. I took 2 packages out of the desk drawer and laid them out neatly in front of me. In one, In a carved scabbard was an ancient dagger, the hilt covered with silver, tarnished from time. When I pulled it out of its sheath, the weapon fit into my hand. It seemed as if it had been made especially for me. In another bundle was a small figure of a cat-like animal made of some unknown material. It was probably carved from stone and covered with bronze paint. Its muzzle, with its mouth open, looked very spectacular. The eyes of the predator were skillfully embedded with black amethysts, a very rare variety of this semi-precious stone. The finest carving, hundreds of tiny strokes, all this made the sculpture of the beast almost alive. I placed the figurine on the mantelpiece and put the dagger on the table. Maybe someday I'll hang an antique handmade rug in my study with an antique weapon on it. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought the beast on the mantel clanked its teeth ravenously. The next morning, I received a text message with the address. I wrote it down in my notebook, knowing that the message would disappear in a minute. I smoked for a long time staring at the wall. Life teaches me nothing. I'm always meddling in the wrong business. And I always end up as usual, lacking gratitude and hatred. And I'm about to carry a burden that I'll have to bear for the rest of my life. What about the other side? There is no other side. What is this girl to me? Who is she to me? I can't save and help everyone. It's her fate, and there's nothing I can do about it. Besides, where am I going to put her? I live alone, and I don't have any babysitters. That's a relief. I finally made the right decision. For the time being, I have clearly learned one truth. Most women, regardless of age, are monstrously ungrateful. My car was driving along a dirt road, periodically diving into shallow puddles and breaking thin ice with its wheels. It had been freezing since the night, but it was clear that spring had defeated the tedious winter. In an hour, the sun would warm up and the ice would melt, and the road would turn into an impassable swamp. Soon, a one-story barrack with walls blackened by time and rain appeared from behind a bend. I pushed open the shabby door and stepped into the dark corridor. It looked uninhabited, but judging by the voices coming from one of the rooms, there were people here. I went to the plywood door leading into one of the rooms and turned the knob without removing my gloves. The smell of rotten booze hit my nostrils. Opposite the entrance, at a table littered with leftovers and empty bottles, with her head resting on her folded arms, sat a half-naked woman. Two homeless-looking men were arguing loudly about something. When I opened the door, all these picturesque characters stared at me in surprise. Even the woman raised her head with difficulty. "What do you want?" coughed one of the men. In a dirty overcoat worn over his naked body, where is the girl? Trying not to breathe the unbearable stench, I asked loudly. She was here yesterday. Uncle seemed to be badly out of his mind with a terrible hangover. He pushed the woman. "Hey, what's up? Where's the girl? What do you need her for?" The woman mumbled, looking at me with swollen eyes from drinking. I ignored her question. Someone stirred on the iron bed against the opposite wall. One of the men nodded at a pile of dirty rags. "Here she is." Vera crawled out from under the rags. She didn't even have the strength to cry. Those bastards must not have fed her lately. I gently lifted the girl up, and she trustingly nuzzled her nose into my coat, like a kitten. "Leave her alone." The woman tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't hold her, and she fell back on the stool. "I'm taking the girl," I stated. "I honestly don't care who Vera is." "What do you mean I'm taking her?" The first man reacted. "We fed her, clothed her, brought her up. For nothing." I threw a few bills on the table. "Is this enough?" I could see the eyes of all the members of the team flashing greedily. Wrapping the child in my coat, I went out to the car. Putting the girl in the back seat, I asked, "Do you remember me?" She nodded. If you enjoyed this story, please like and leave a comment. It's important for us and will help promote this video. Thank you for watching us.